part of the UN. After all, that was your land, and you were the indigenous population. The Jewish Zionist movement also didn't like this partition plan, and it's very clear from quotations by early leaders, which I have in the appendices of my book, and I can happily refer to in the Q&A, that they had no intention of settling for 54% and really wanted it all. But anyway, in 1947, this partition was proposed, and thus began the mass expulsion then by early Zionist forces of the vast majority of the Muslim and Christian population from the area, and what became known to Israelis as the War of Independence and to Palestinians as a Nakba. Because after all, they wanted to have a Jewish Israeli state. That was the whole point. But you can't have a Jewish state with a non-Jewish majority. And so Zionist forces had to find a way to get rid of most non-Jews in the area. And here you can see the roughly 500 Palestinian villages that were razed and depopulated during the Nakba. There are survivors still around. Many of them still have their papers, their land deeds and house titles, and they say very clearly, this is a woman in South Lebanon. We didn't sell it; it's still ours. I still have my deed here. I just can't go simply because I'm not Jewish. And here's a Nakba survivor with his keys to his home. Many families, hurriedly locked their doors and left, assuming they'll be back in a few weeks. And now, more than 60 years later, have never been allowed to go back to their homes and lands. And what's very striking is that I could go to his house, right? I could go to his land. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, live a happy, comfortable, privileged life. And yet I could go to his land. Israel would pay me to leave my house in St. Louis, Missouri, and move on to his land. I could buy his land, I could farm his land, I could grow things on his land, I could build a house on his land. If his house is still there, I could live in his house on his land. He can't even visit because he's not Jewish. And we hear so much about the necessity of a Jewish state to exist, that a Jewish state exists. Well, what does it mean if having a Jewish state requires the perpetual discrimination and oppression of the indigenous non-Jewish population? Does that change anything? When you ask this man, do you recognize the right of Israel to exist? What you're saying to him is, do you recognize the right for there to be a state on your historic homeland that explicitly excludes you and your entire people and your entire family just because of your religion? If he says no, do you blame him? What would the indigenous population of this country say? So a lot of this is not put in perspective in our media and in the conversations that you might hear by Zionist communities around campus, but even just looking at the flag of Israel and what it represents. Who does this represent and who doesn't it represent? And even Palestinian citizens of Israel, the 1948 Palestinians themselves, to be Jewish, non-Jewish citizens of a Jewish state, what does it mean? Because Israel, here for example, you have Palestinian Bedouins in the Negev in 1948 Israel, whose homes have been demolished literally dozens of times in villages like Al-Araqib, because they are unrecognized villages simply because they are not Jewish. So, what does it mean to have a state that is not the state of its citizens? It's the state of the Jewish people. It's the state of a whole bunch of people who aren't its citizens, like me. And it's not the state of a whole bunch of people who are its citizens, Palestinian citizens of Israel. That's what Israel is. It really brings home this idea of the right, the so-called right, of its so-called right to exist. So that shows sort of part of the progression. In 1967, of course, Israel occupied all remaining Palestinian lands, and thus began the occupation that I talked about at the beginning. But you see the way in which the occupation is but the most recent iteration of Israel's colonization project. And many people prefer this kind of a map because it shows that this is not sort of something that happened in history, but something that continues every single day and will continue unless it is stopped. And so, most importantly, is not simply understanding what's happening and feeling bad about it, but talking about how are we implicated and what are we going to do about it. And so Oftentimes I stop the presentation here and kind of have a discussion, but I have a pretty good idea of what there is to do about it, so I'm just going to get straight to it because SJP has already, been working really hard on that, and I want to lift up their campaigns themselves and show the way in which it's there's really I envy you, actually. I'm not on a campus. I live up in South St. Louis, and I get involved in BDS campaigns as I can. But you are part of, if you're part of the University of Illinois community, you are part of a community that can do something extremely powerful. And that is to join the BDS movement to divest from the occupation. And so I want to talk briefly about BDS. Ahmed talked a bit about it earlier, but the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions targeting Israel and complicit institutions was issued in 2005. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary. It's incredible what has happened in just 10 years. But this is a rights-based call. The Palestinian call for BDS is not about a particular solution, but about the necessary components, the basic components to fulfill the basic human rights of the Palestinian people that are needed for any solution. And that has to do with ending the occupation, has to do with ending all discrimination within 1948 Israel, aka equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, 1948 Palestinians, and of course the inalienable, internationally inscribed right of return for the Palestinian people, the Palestinian refugees and their descendants. The opposition often characterizes BDS as this evil, nefarious, horrible movement, but we know that BDS is a non-violent response to Israel's incredible violence and brutality, and that the tactics of boycotts and divestment and sanctions have been used throughout history in anti-racist, anti-colonial struggles, very effectively, for example, in the anti-apartheid movement, challenging South African apartheid, used by Gandhi, used by Martin Luther King, used by Nelson Mandela, people that we hold up now as heroes. Well, now's the time to figure out, I used to sort of, when I was a kid reading about Martin Luther King, talk about, if I'd been there, I would have been marching from Selma to Montgomery, holding Martin Luther King's hand. Well, this is the test. What are you doing today in 2015, and do you support these kinds of extraordinary liberation movements? And BDS, one of the incredible things about it is that it's so clearly coming from Palestinian civil society, that the call was issued by more than 170 Palestinian civil society organizations representing all walks of Palestinian life, from refugee organizations to Palestinians in Jerusalem, in Gaza, in 1948 Israel, in the West Bank. An incredibly unifying movement in spite of Israel's attempts to divide the Palestinian population. And what's, I think, one of the most brilliant things about BDS for many of us here in the U.S. solidarity context is that it places Palestinians clearly as the center of accountability. That this is coming from the Palestinians themselves. This isn't about white Americans figuring out what do Palestinians want or what's right for them. But this is coming from Palestinians themselves, and it's very clearly led both in Palestine and in the U.S. by Palestinians, and that's a lot of its power. Oh, let me go back actually. One of the things that has been so effective on university campuses is the way that I think it moves people from that place of sympathy to action, right? It says, it's not enough to simply be against the occupation or to think that it's very, sad what's happening to Palestinians. And by the way, people who oppose BDS will tell you just how much they oppose the occupation and just how much they support Palestinians. But the test is, are they listening? Are they listening to the people that they purport to support? And are they willing to go from words to action? And that's what's brilliant about BDS, is that it holds us accountable for our complicity in the occupation and Israeli apartheid, and it also gives us back our power. We're no longer waiting for Obama or U.S. Congress or the university administration to just magically come to their senses. We are demanding that change. And it has incredible power, putting us really on the offensive and forcing people to take a side, to not be able to be neutral anymore. That's part of the power and brilliance of BDS, and it's just incredibly exciting that you have launched the BDS campus, and I can't wait. I hope you will let me come to your hearing when you have one. I'll drive all the way from St. Louis to see it, because I'm sure it'll be beautiful. I understand you guys are doing some research on the university's investments, and so a lot of universities will sort of intentionally be very opaque about their investments, making it very hard to figure out what you're invested in. And I can talk a bit maybe offline a bit later about some tactics to get around that. But some of the sort of usual suspects in terms of U.S. corporations, mostly U.S., some international corporations that are involved in Israeli oppression, that many universities like the UIUC would likely be involved and invested in Caterpillar, for example, making the bulldozers used to destroy Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem and all over historic Palestine. Hewlett-Packard not only makes your, maybe many of your computers, but also makes the technology used for racial profiling in the Palestinian West Bank, and also used for racial profiling here in this country, used against communities of color by ICE and by racist police practices. Elbit Systems, for example, is an Israeli weapons manufacturer. We want to check on them, which makes all kinds of technology used to enforce the occupation. Motorola Solutions, which makes technology that's used to monitor settlements. Veolia, which I'll talk a bit about. Until very recently, Veolia was involved in running segregated bus lines through the West Bank. It was involved in providing water services to Israeli settlements. It was involved in a landfill where Israeli settler trash was dumped on Palestinian farmland. I say was, because there's some news that I'll mention, which you may have heard about already, but the ways in which BDS is working and changing the practices of these corporations. G4S, the world's largest private security corporation, which runs many Israeli prisons as well as U.S. Detention centers for juveniles, and is also used in the transportation of immigrants as they're deported from the U.S. And you can see the way in which people are making the connections between struggles of the Palestinian people and communities of color here in the United States. There's also Sabra Hummus. Here's a cool sort of graffiti that was, like graffiti art that was done. I think this is in the Bay Area, but basically making fun of the Sabra Hummus, which is connected to the Israeli military, by showing that it's connected to the stealing of Palestinian land. Here's some cool graffiti art that was done on a campus actually about an exchange program between a university and a U.S. university and an Israeli university. You can read them later, but basically the students are all talking about apartheid, and then here's a tank. There's all kinds of creative things being done. Really, like I said, Students for Justice in Palestine is leading the way in this movement, and we are just trying to keep up and lift up what you guys are doing and promote it and make it as powerful as possible. Not that you need much help, because it's pretty amazing what's happening. And I made this super, it's not even complete, but just to give a sense of the universities and colleges around the country that have taken action around boycott and divestment. Just to point out a few, there's like dozens here, this is not even complete, but for example, Hampshire College, as far back as 2009, actually divested from companies involved in the Israeli occupation. Evergreen State College became a Caterpillar-free campus, and maybe some of the sort of different ways that people have taken action around boycott and divestment on campuses. Arizona State University ran an awesome campaign that was tying racist immigration policies to Israeli racism. and talked about divestment from corporations like G4S. We'll talk a bit more about that. Let's see. The stars are in the wrong places. University of Florida had, they got more than 10,000 signatures on their campus. Can you imagine? I think it was a pretty sizable proportion of their student population. So people are going for petitions, people are going for resolutions of their student governments. You know, at Hampshire, they actually went to the investors themselves. Some are doing referendums. So, for example, DePaul University did a divestment referendum that was very successful. The University of California Graduate Union became the first student union to endorse full boycott, divestment, and sanctions. UC Student Association, likewise, which is an association of all the different University of California campuses across the state. Huge, probably the biggest campus victory yet. They passed the divestment resolution. University of Toledo, just a couple months ago, they had been shut down totally. They had gone for a hearing on divestment to their student government, and were basically told that they couldn't debate divestment, and were just totally shut down. They rallied, they mobilized. They got some legal support. They came back and they won 21-4 in favor of divestment. I mean, it's just incredible. And just recently, Columbia Prison Divest, which is an incredible campaign that's talking about divestment from prisons from the U.S. to Israel, from the Correctional CCA. I don't remember what it stands for, but thank you. Correctional Corporation of America, and from corporations like G4S that are implicated in racist policing and mass incarceration across the world. This awesome campaign, Columbia Prison Divest, just was endorsed not only by the student government of Columbia, but also by the entity on campus that makes investment, the student entity that makes investment decisions. So they're making huge headway, and this type of joint struggle coalition building is really, again, being led by students for justice in Palestine around the country, and making those important connections between U.S. racism and Israeli racism in ways that are about building power for all these different struggles and not changing the conversation in any way. Us in St. Louis and Ferguson, we've been mobilizing a lot in support of Ferguson and Black Lives Matter, and here's just some photos. I don't know, did anyone make it down for the Weekend of Resistance in Ferguson? That we did a few months ago in October. Yeah, nice, yes. Anyway, I include these because it's a big part of what's happening right now in the movement, but also because it's inspired so much by the student leadership of coalition building. This is just a contingent to the Ferguson Weekend of Resistance. And so I don't know if you guys heard, like 3 days ago, I think it was on Friday? No, Thursday. Did you guys hear about this, Wesleyan? So 37 students occupied the administration at Wesleyan University, demanding divestment from Israeli occupation, from prisons, and from fossil fuels altogether. And it is amazing. It's so amazing that I'm actually going to show a video of it if Ahmed can get me to the internet.
I'd like to point out that all this is Illinois Net.
Thank you, University of Illinois.
Oh, it looks like the boycott stuff. It's money.
It's worth it.
Is this Illinois Wesleyan?
No, I think it's in Connecticut. And Wesleyan, the history is they had already passed a divestment resolution in their student government, and their student government itself has funds, so they already divested their funds, but they wanted more. They wanted the university to divest also. Oh, Tyler, you think it's going to live stream okay? Trust me. It's on YouTube, yeah. You can watch it after if it doesn't work out, but I'm hoping it will. I want to see it again.
Alright, so this is it?
Yeah, but it still looks like it's still kind of doing it. Oh, good. Okay, great.
So we're still respecting the blood.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We bypass the leaders, yes.
Boycott is a tactic, not a dogma. We don't have to. We can pick and choose as is useful to the movement. It's on Thursday. We're here because we just had a conversation about investment from fossil fuels and the apartheid and the prison system. So we're here physically as a way to discuss some business as usual because we've gone through all the bureaucratic channels available to us and haven't gotten a response from the coach. So we would like to have some conversation as soon as possible and you guys can get here until that's possible. You haven't reached out to get some appointments to with them. We've got office hours, we've got the breakfast, we've had many meetings.
Okay, well, he's not available at the moment because he has a meeting scheduled. But I would be happy to schedule an appointment for you at another time.
Hi. What's this about?
We're having a conversation about divestment from what's been developed from the possession complex fossil fuels and